In the last several years, in the United States, if not worldwide, drug abuse and drug use has literally become epidemic. It's commonplace, and we live in a sea of drugs. We are inundated by compounds, and their availability and the nature of them is such that we are affected in many different ways. Today, we will hope to talk about several things about drugs. I'm going to talk about how drugs act in general, how they affect you, common things about drugs and how they affect our bodies, and then we'll go through specific drugs and talk about the medical consequences or the side effects perhaps the people we get them from don't share with us. So today, let's take a look at how drugs work. Drugs work primarily upon the brain, and what we're looking at here is a nerve cell, a neuron. There are billions of those in your head, and drugs act upon that system. Nerves work by sending messages back and forth to each other. And if we look at them, we see the message going from one nerve to the next. It has to jump across the little space where you see it there. And that's called a synapse. And in that space, chemicals are exchanged, and chemical messages are exchanged. And what goes on in that space and those chemicals is responsible for everything you think, hear, feel, see, and experience. Everything from moving your arm to the emotion of crying. So part of our brains and how drugs affect them affect a part called the reward system of our brain. Here we see, and we'll see deep in our brains, is this thing called the reward pathway. Drugs directly affect that. That's your unconscious, the deep part of your brain that is responsible for behaviors and feelings that have to do with your daily living and daily experience. Thirst, hunger, anger, fear, blood pressure, pulse, all controlled in that part of your brain. And the messages that are sent there control very, very instinctual behavior in you. We'll look now at this from a different perspective. Drugs directly go to that part of your brain to cause their effect, and in fact alter the levels of those chemical messages that are sent between them, causing great confusion within the brain. And when the drugs go away, the amount of chemicals you have in your natural self is markedly decreased. One of the major problems of drugs in general is we don't know what we're buying. Just like you want to eat a hot dog or some sausage, but you don't want to see how it's made. The problems with many of the drugs we take are they are tremendously adulterated and contain compounds that are extremely dangerous. Many of these compounds, other than the drugs themselves, are what causes some of the damage to the brain and damage to our bodies. When we go to buy the cocaine or when we go to buy the heroin, we know many times that 10–20% is actually the drug, and the rest is a mixture of various chemicals that can be very dangerous. So one of the major side effects of drugs are the contaminants that are in them and that are taken. Another common problem to everyone who uses drugs is there is a high incidence of sexually transmitted diseases associated with people who use them. The incidence of HIV, hepatitis C, and our old friends syphilis, gonorrhea, and chlamydia are all part of actually side effects of drug use through the problems they cause and the changes in our judgment that occur as the use of the drugs. Let's talk about tolerance. This is a common problem to all drugs. It takes 6 beers where it used to take 2. It takes 5 bags of heroin to get me through the day when I used to make it on 2. I need 6 to 8 rocks of the crack to use instead of 1 or 2 in an evening. That phenomena occurs at the level of our brains and hurts us all. We also know that from tolerance comes dependence. In other words, after a while, we need the drug just to feel normal and get through the day. That's a very different situation from the individual who has not ever used a drug, and it's certainly something the individuals who use them continuously will face. In other words, when the drug is gone, one feels bad, so we need the chemicals in order to feel normal and get through a day. You can also tell tolerance very easily and dependence by the size of your wallet and pocketbook. After a few times of using the drugs, we find ourselves with less and less money. And if we don't understand our neurochemistry, we certainly can understand how drugs have affected our pocketbooks in terms of addiction and abuse.